It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brand Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Howdy Holmes, President and CEO of the Chelsea Milling Company, the makers of Jiffy Mix. Howdy started working at Chelsea Milling back in 1963 as a sophomore in high school, but left the company in '68 to pursue a boyhood dream to become a race car driver. He spent 20 years in motorsports, winning regional races, the Formula Atlantic Championship, and was Rookie of the Year at the Indianapolis 500. He competed at Indy 6 times, qualifying in the front row in 1984. Howdy operated a motorsports marketing company and an advertising agency while authoring an award-winning book called Formula Car Technology before rejoining the family business in 1987. He then led a transformation of the then 100-year-old family business, and with the help of others, a professionally managed strategic vision was successfully introduced. Today, known for quality and value, Jiffy Mix is uniquely positioned for the 21st century. Howdy Holmes, welcome into the corner office.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I hope I can come up with some suggestions and some personal experiences which will be helpful to others.
Oh, Howdy, that's fantastic. We've had a couple of conversations up till now. And as I think I mentioned when we first connected, your name came up when my girlfriend was preparing some Jiffy Mix cornbread for my, ultimate desire and delight. And I looked at the box and I said, the Chelsea Milling Company, this sounds like a great company. And, looked you up and reached out to you. And I was just so flabbergasted when you decided to join us and hear your story. And you've got such an interesting one. So let's start in the beginning. I'd love to hear about the early years. I know that your parents, of course, your mother in particular, very much involved in this business, and grandmother, as from what I understand. Tell us a little bit about your early years and what your early family life was like.
Well, I'm a big proponent of family business or business families, and there is a difference depending on which word you put first. But it's always been the American dream to run your own business, and I didn't really know much different. I was born into a family that had a history, learned a great deal about it at the dinner table, and I'm of the age where you had to be home at 6 o'clock, period.
Right.
And that was how family kept in touch with one another and so on. So I learned a lot at the dinner table. And as you mentioned, I started to work here in the family business just kind of naturally. And as soon as I could get my driver's license and I always was intrigued, I guess. And I didn't, that's the way it started for me. I didn't know any different.
Yeah, right.
And as I got older, I realized that, there were lots of other avenues to take and so on. But, my heart was always with Chelsea Milling Company.
Yeah. Now, tell us a little bit of the deeper history. I know that there's an interesting story around your father who was a twin, correct? And there was some friends in the family. Tell us a little bit about the history of how Jiffy got started.
Well, my grandmother had identical twins, and I refer to them as the boys. And when they were teenagers, being raised here in Chelsea, the boys had a friend, another male friend who was actually being raised by a single parent, and it was the father.
Right.
And now keep in mind, this is like 1920.
Pretty unusual in those days.
25. Yeah,
yeah.
it was. And
Yeah.
I don't know the story of how it was just a single parent, but as it turns out, the boys had invited their friend to come over for lunch, and he was reluctant because his dad had made him a bag lunch. Well, teenagers are what they are, pretty unpredictable. And of course, the young man accepted the offer to come over for lunch, and my grandmother, noticing that the young man had brought his lunch with him, was more than a little curious to discover
what that single dad put in there.
What's in that brown bag? And knowing, of course, that this young man was being raised by, his father only.
Right,
and
right.
So she waited for her opportunity to kind of take a peek in there. And when she opened it up, right on top was a biscuit, which she kind of referred to as looked more like a white hockey puck, and
Poor
and
kid.
and that
Oh, goodness.
But the interesting thing is, she had this moment of tremendous compassion for this young man's father, because in those days, baking from scratch meant literally baking from scratch. You had a little soda, you had a little flour, you had a little salt, pinch of this, handful of that, spoonful of this, and so she knew how much
there's no going down to a Starbucks and getting a muffin. Right?
No, absolutely not. She knew how much time and effort was necessary to make biscuits, and so she had this thought: wouldn't it be great if we could invent a mix that would save people time in the kitchen and be so easy, even a man could do it. Now, you have to keep that in context, because in today's world, if you say that, somebody's going to get mad. Well, so get over it.
Right.
And the context is the early 20s, and this, man raising a child who was cooking from scratch, and she was just thoroughly impressed. So that's what motivated her to try and come up with a mix. And 5 or 6 years later, she did, along with her husband. And they introduced the first retail prepared mix ever. All-purpose Jiffy baking mix was introduced in April of 1930, and honestly, spawned a industry. And
Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines and all those.
Would you stop swearing, please? Good. I thought this was.
I worked for Procter and Gamble.
I thought this was a family podcast. Good heavens! So early in the game, and we're already using swear words. Yeah, we sort of kid around here that the B word is not a bad word, but it stands for that yellow stuff that's on the shelf that's from General Mills. And so, all kidding aside, we enjoy our competition. We enjoy the people that we compete against, and but it's healthy to have fun about stuff and not get too serious.
Well, so it was an established business then by the time you were a teenager, right? And growing up. So Jiffy was well underway by then. And Dad was running the business, or Mom was running the business when you were a kid? How was the power shared between the two of them?
Well, unfortunately, there was a tragedy. And the baking mix was introduced in April of 1930.
Right.
And then, unfortunately, in 1936, my grandfather was killed in a freak accident out here at Chelsea Milling Company. And so at that time, 1936, in late fall, my grandmother instantly became president, and her two sons, my father and my uncle, identical twins that I earlier referred to as the boys, they both came into the business to help out. And they they did one heck of a job.
Yeah.
My
But
grandmother,
were they in their teenage
they
years
were
or in their early 20s?
23 years of
20, the
age.
early 20s. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and my Uncle Dudley had just finished college. My father had taken a year out in his schooling to try, you're going to love this one, to try and invent the hydrogen engine of all things.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Wow.
kind of a,
A small little
ambitious
task. Yeah. Weekend project.
task. Good heavens. And so it's interesting that the identical twins really were quite different in their personalities and so on, but they split up the tasks at Chelsea Milling Company, even though they sometimes disagreed with themselves,
Right.
being soft with that one.
Right.
But to their credit, they made it work.
Yeah.
And so when I came on the scene, really 1963 at the time, my father was president and my uncle Dudley was vice president. So
Right. Got it.
that's the way it was.
And was it kind of assumed you'd always go into the family business, Howdy?
That's a $64,000 question. And what makes that so valuable is when I look back at my upbringing and in relationship to my interest in or not in coming to the family business, there really wasn't much discussion about it. And it was, keep in mind that the times in the early 60s and 50s and so on, their families, the men worked a
Right.
lot.
Yeah.
And they were products, they came through the 1929 and all of that mess.
Right.
So
Right.
there were, and the women pretty much handled the household and
Right.
took care of the kids. And, we can say all we want about equality, but there are certain responsibilities in society or in families that, yeah, they change from time to time, but it was pretty distinct then. So,
Yes.
I came here because I wanted to, because I was interested in the place and proud of being a family member, and so plus at the same time, I was a teenager. I wanted to put some frog skins in my pocket, Now, frog skins, for those of you who don't know, are dollar bills or $5 bills or $10
Right.
bills,
Right.
but there was always a sense, honestly, of pride
Yeah.
and honor in working at Chelsea Milling Company and working. I won't say with my dad, but at the because men didn't share much in those days.
That's right. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Different culture.
and it turns out, when I look back, is okay, fine. So you got to learn things on your own. Okay,
Right.
great. That's the best way to learn things.
Yeah.
You make
Sure.
mistakes, and
Yeah.
you learn from those mistakes, and so
Sometimes you have the scars to prove it.
well, you do, and that's what Vaseline's for. You make them go away. All right, all right. So they're still internally there, but so you got to deal with it mentally. All right, so fine, deal with it. And so I think that situation of you're on your own
Yeah.
was okay with me. Always from parents, you get principles and advice and so on. And in that context, my parents were, conservative people.
Right.
They were fortunate. Some might say privileged, but you'd never know it. Okay.
What was some of the advice that you got as a kid growing up that you remember? You care to remember?
Well, yeah. The better advice were things like, you have how do I say this, a expectation from others.
Right.
And it's often not realistic because people kind of make decisions about other people prematurely. And, my father's probably best advice was, you have to prove yourself. And so when I started here, I was doing things like scrubbing graffiti off rail cars and swinging from a rope in a flour mill storage inventory, trying to sweep the walls, with this 9-foot broom, with 1 foot in a rope. It was wild.
Oh my gosh!
And you know what? It was okay with me because that I had to show and wanted to that I was capable of hard work just like anybody else.
Right.
And that, you had lots of choices.
Well, you had to even, as the, owner's kid, you had to probably even show more of that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Much higher expectations, particularly of those that were, there years before you.
Right. And I think the assumption is with other employees that, okay, what's this kid going to be like? Is he going to wander around like he's,
owns
the prince or something, and the owner's son? So I think that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, that's right.
The owner's son needs to sort of establish his or her own sort of reputation.
Yeah.
And that was instilled with me, and I'm the eldest of 5 kids, and we talked about values and principles often at dinner, and so they stuck with me.
Now, did your brothers and sisters get involved in the business, and are they today?
Well, my brother did work there summers for a while, and not so much my sisters.
Yeah.
Later on in life, my brother was working here, and as an adult, he was working here when I came back from my racing career in 1987. He was here. Also, a cousin had made a career of working at Chelsea.
One of Dudley's kids.
Dudley's son, right? He had Dudley. My uncle had 3 children
as well.
2 daughters and a son. And so, maybe if we talk a little bit about family businesses as a individual who's kind of swept the floors and then came in as a possible successor, and now having done that, there is always a tremendous amount of confusion and emotional drama, especially around succession. And the thing about family businesses is that only about 26 or 27% make it to the second generation, which
that's right.
It tells us all something, and that means 74% doesn't make it. So if you can kind of figure out some of the universal problems, you maybe have a chance. And I kind of look back and have a couple of cliches that have sort of surfaced for me, and one of them is that you don't make family decisions with your head, and you don't make business decisions with your heart. And if you can't recognize the difference, they're both going to be in trouble.
Right.
The other thing is there's generally 2 camps of people in business families or family businesses, and one camp is they think that ownership equals leadership, and the other group thinks that no, ownership is something you inherit, leadership is something you have to earn. I happen to be in that camp, and those differences honestly are a paradox, which means there is no solution. The best you can do is kind of manage those different beliefs, and it can get pretty sticky.
Well, you made a very important decision, and you alluded to it in your bio, and you just mentioned about your racing career. You were 5 years in. You were in your early 20s. It was 1968. Gosh. And for those of us, those of our listeners who don't remember what was happening in the U.S. in 1968, it was probably one of the most tumultuous times in our society, right, with the Vietnam War and everything else. And you decided to become a race car driver. Tell us a little bit about the thinking behind that. And, you did it for almost 20 years, and then you came back to the business. But give us a little bit of insight into A, how that was. How did you come to that conclusion, and B, how that was perceived by the company, particularly your dad and your family?
Well, I'll maybe get to the punchline before I tell the story, but I would ask anyone who's listening if anyone believes that there's a relationship between intellectual intelligence and race car driving, please let me know. So the journey to racing really goes back to our family. Would go to the Indy 500 every year as a family, and the first one that I went to was 1957. I was
Wow.
9 years old. In those days, there were 400,000 people in the stands.
Incredible.
And really fond memories of it's about a 4-hour drive from where we live in Michigan, south to Indianapolis. And as we got into the over the Indiana line, there was a big state park, Pokagon National Park. We would stop there and have burnt chicken and deviled eggs and so on, and
lunch on the way. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like all big events, we didn't stay in Indianapolis because,
of course not.
Everybody doubles or triples the price of hotels and things like that. So we're a conservative group. We would stay outside that 50-mile radius in a I won't name the hotel, or actually motel, because it's not fair, but it was right next to a drive-in movie. I'll just leave it at that. It was not the Ritz. It was it was not a 4-star hotel.
Right. I think it started with an M instead of an H.
Right? It was, but it was us. That's what we did.
Right.
So for a number of years we did that, and you mentioned 1968. What triggered the reinterest in this boyhood dream of being a race car driver? Now, mind you, I didn't have any idea what that meant to be a race car driver.
Right.
I just observed the Indy 500. That's it for a number of years. But Michigan International Speedway was built here in the Irish Hills, and they offered a private driver's school one year, and everybody within 50 or 60 miles of that racetrack received this 6-color, really snazzy brochure that advertised the Michigan International School of High Performance Driving. And they said it was going to be taught by Sterling Moss, who was a very famous English Formula One driver. Well, turns out Sterling Moss probably had no idea where Michigan is, let alone Michigan International Speedway. In any event, I signed up and I went, and there was sort of instruction in the classroom and driving in these Formula Fords on a road course. And I'll never forget the first time I got in that car. That was it. I mean, somehow, somehow I was going to do this. And honestly, you mentioned.
And how old were you at the time? What was that first?
68. I would have been, 47 to 21.
21. Yeah.
And so you mentioned thinking. Well, there wasn't any thinking involved. This was all just some dream.
This was all heart.
It was in control. And so I was in college at the time at Eastern Michigan, majoring. I wanted to teach business, or so I thought. And much to the non-delight of my parents, I withdrew from college in my senior year.
Wow.
And I, with a very close friend of mine, built a homemade trailer, purchased a Formula Ford, Ford, which is a small, early road racing car. And I got the engine manual from my college bookstore, ordered a set of tools from a catalog, Auto World catalog, for $69.95.
Wow.
And the guys out here at Chelsea Milling Company built me a 12 by 20-foot plywood garage in one of the warehouses, and I was in business.
That was it.
I had no more idea than a rabbit what I was doing.
But you went on. You were Rookie of the Year at Indianapolis 500. You went there 6 times, I think, right? Is that correct?
6 times, yeah.
Qualifying in the front row, and wow, what an amazing time. And how was it the very first time? I mean, as a kid of 8, 9 years old in the stands with 400,000 people, and then for the first time when you were down on the road, that must have just been an amazing feeling, huh? What a transformation.
It was an amazing feeling, and one of the things that I remember the most. Keep in mind, as a kid, we would draw names out of a hat to see who was going to win and so on. So there were names like Unser, there were names like Andretti, names like John Cock, names like Foyt and stuff. Well, the very first day that I arrived at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 1979, and I went into the garage area, I should say the old garage area, the old wooden ones. The first guy I see coming towards me is A.J. Foyt, along with his mechanic, Jack. And you have to understand the environment in racing is all about intimidation. It's all about confidence. And so nothing is, impossible save for tomorrow. And so I put my hand out to shake A.J. Foyt's hand, and I waited until he was on the ball of his feet, so he was a little bit off balance. And I just kind of, I'm a little guy, and 5'4" and 135, something like that. A.J. is, let's just say, larger than that, and so I pulled him a little bit off balance, and Jack, his chief mechanic, said, when you get done racing cars, we want you to ride our horses. So, be a jockey. They have some horses. So that was my introduction to to this guy who to me was a hero. And
he was.
And yikes! All of a sudden, I'm
you're in it.
Yeah, I'm a competitor.
You're in it. So 20 years doing that, and what a great career. You went on to do a marketing company. Now, was that while you were still racing, the motorsports marketing?
No,
so that was side by side?
To me, it was it was a full-on business. I had an advertising company. I mean, I wasn't on Wall Street, okay? It was, but I realized in the beginning that I was limited to the mechanical part of preparing cars and so on.
Right.
And so I made the decision. I started that way, but a couple of years in, I realized I had to sort of manage my career a little bit differently, and so I got out of the car preparation business and went after the seeking sponsorship business. And that's the way motorsports works. So
that's where the money is, as they say.
Well, that's right. And I wish it was all about talent, but it isn't. Like baseball or basketball or football or hockey, some of those other things. It's a business deal, right?
Sure.
And so, I mean, that's where I learned business. From top to bottom, left to right, in and out.
And you wrote a book, right? Formula Car Technology.
I did, and it's about 1/3 nuts and bolts, 1/3 driving, and 1/3, how you find sponsors and stuff. And it's another example. What what am I doing writing a book? Are you kidding me? But the lesson is, if you want to do something bad enough, you'll find a way.
Yeah.
If you really care about something deeply, you'll find a way.
Passion.
And it doesn't matter.
So no involvement at all with Chelsea Milling and Jiffy during this period of time? Were you totally out of the business?
A little bit. Sometimes, if I
could get the call.
Well, no. If there were opportunities for me to sort of to promote Jiffy on the race cars.
Did Jiffy? Yeah. Did they sponsor your car? I mean,
sometimes they did, and other times not. But the interesting thing is that as a brand, we don't do any advertising.
Right.
And so it was a little bit unusual, obviously due to my relationship with the president of the company, who happened to be my father. just so lucky. But from my standpoint, it was, why can't I help this company, raise awareness of this brand through motorsports? And I was convinced then, and certainly are now, that if done right, the exposure is well worth the expenditure. So I actually years ago kind of went back and did the numbers on the cases sold, and during the times that Jiffy was either a major or a minor sponsor in racing, and I looked at the case sales during there, and it really was they increased by a third.
Really?
Wow. And I'm not willing, nor am I saying that it's totally because of that racing exposure, but I am willing to say that it certainly didn't hurt.
It certainly helped pay some of the expenses. Well, you rejoined the business in '87, and you've been quoted by saying the relationship between racing teams and manufacturing are kind of like twin sisters, in the sense that they're always trying to improve something with the mechanical equipment. What did you mean by that?
Well, Chelsea Milling Company is, we're a manufacturer. The majority of we make little blue and white boxes that happen to be under the brand name Jiffy. So the majority of our folks are working with machines in one way or another. Sure. On top of that, we're totally vertically integrated, and we the only thing we don't do here at Chelsea is we don't grow the crops. So we store grain, we mill that into flour. We do our own mixing, our own packaging, our own warehousing. We print our own boxes. So there's an enormous amount of sort of mechanical equipment at our campus. And what I mean by twin sisters in racing's all about development, right? The whole idea is to go faster, every time you go on the track. And that requires you're changing the car to meet the change in that, whether it's weather or whatever the heck the situation is. And so there was that's what I mean by the twin sisters, and so you have to learn how to get the best out of equipment. You have to learn how to get the best out of people. That's by far the most important. But, my experience with doing all these things in motorsports was, as it turns out, was a great background for coming to a family business, which is, in the manufacturing sector.
Right. Sure.
Now, nobody believed that. I, as I mentioned earlier, I was the eldest son of the president, and people knew me as a race car driver. And that turns out to be that I didn't say, MBA Harvard. I said race car driver. And each one of those has some certain criteria that is assumed.
Well, you came back to the company, and I guess there was some things that were in disarray. The company was about 100 years old at the time, and you kind of had to go through a transformation with that. Was that one of the reasons you came back in '87?
I came back, really. I always knew I was going to come back. I just didn't know when. And I really planned I had a 5-year exit plan from 1983 through '88 because I if you're fortunate enough to do something that you love to do, it's kind of hard to stop it.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier the difference between the heart and the head, and I had to separate those two things and
Right.
be absolutely certain that when I left racing, it was something I love to do, going back to another thing I love to do, but in a totally different world.
Yeah.
I had to be absolutely certain that I was doing the right thing, and that there was no unfinished business in the motorsports, because I knew there was a whole new set of challenges in the family business. And you were right. I went from this really, really, really fast-paced motorsports world on and off the track to this 100-year-old family business which moved at glacier pace. and maybe I'm being a little bit generous. On top of that, there was this enormous family business drama, and I like to speak of any business in three sectors: facilities, systems, and people.
Right.
And when I came back in 1987, it really kind of looked at what we were doing, and so on. I was afraid, because time had marched by, and we hadn't upgraded facilities or systems, or people, for that matter.
Yeah.
I'm not saying people were great and dedicated and so on, but which is terrific. But whether dedicated is one thing, learning new things and keeping up with the competition is another thing.
Right.
So
not a lot of new blood coming
it
in.
Was really challenging. And so
now, did you come back as CEO, president? Was Dad still in charge then, or?
Why am I laughing? He's thinking. Well, it's because no, I came back, and as any good family business avoidance president would do, is I was given the tag of a vice president. My cousin was a vice president, and my brother was a vice president. So there, equality, always equality.
Sure.
However, I acted like a CEO, and because that's what I was used to doing, is making all the shots and figuring out. Well, I think that was pretty abrasive to a lot of people, because that's not the way things were done. And I really wanted to look at and change anything that needed to be changed. And that sort of, what's the right word, sort of attitude, or that sort of position was hadn't been seen by Chelsea Milling Company employees, not to the degree that I was, promoting. And so and the other thing was, it was important for people to understand. We were fortunate enough to have a brand that was well known and respected, and people liked our products. But there comes a point in time where, if you want that brand to remain, on top, you've got to be innovative, and you've got to be creative, and so we went through a mess, quite frankly, and found ourselves on the the front page above the fold, column 1 of Wall Street Journal one day, and that was pretty embarrassing. But it's fact, and nobody likes to kind of, I guess, do the family laundry in public. But whatever.
But you work through it. Well, and you mentioned the Jiffy Mix brand, and I mentioned earlier on how I was introduced to it by my girlfriend, and she told me the story. I said, "Well, how did you get?" She goes, "Well, as a kid growing up in the 70s with my mother and grandmother cooking in the kitchen, that's what I learned." Right.
Yeah.
And, when you've got that kind of strong heritage, what do you think's kept that alive? What's really made the Jiffy brand just so powerful of what it is, and really just establishing the strong culture that exists around it?
I think there are several things. One is that we are the value player. And what I mean by that is any business tries to get an unfair advantage to their competition. right? Something that they can point to that the competition can't duplicate. So in our case, in our brand, we don't do any advertising. We don't do any couponing. We don't do any freestanding inserts or anything that's more traditional. And as a result, we can offer our product for less money. In other words, the consumer saves.
Right.
And we
And you still make your industry margins or better than industry margins.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We do everything here. Flour milling is a tough business. If your flour mill's not running 7 days a week, you're not going to make any money. So, in our case, it isn't always about what's the most profitable thing to do. It's what's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And the right thing to do is to offer highest quality ingredients and the best price. That's what value is.
Yeah.
Most people out in our country live from paycheck to paycheck.
That's right.
And that in terms of absolute numbers. And those folks understand that whatever amount of money is budgeted for food, that dollar, that food dollar will go longest if you eat at home. And, everybody has figured that out again with this pandemic, right?
Yes, that's
with
right.
shelter at home and so on, and restaurants being closed. And the hidden charm, if you will, about baking products, whether it's ours or others, is that when you make some muffins or when you bake, you're doing something for someone.
That's right.
Or you're doing something with someone.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned it, with your mom or your grandfather or your father or your sister or your brother, that's an emotional moment
connection.
which sticks with you forever.
Yep.
And that's what generally causes what we call word of mouth advertising. You could say, oh yeah, it was Jiffy, and we're happy as a clam that it's Jiffy, but behind the brand was the emotional experience.
Right.
And not too many people figure that out. No, you don't.
Yeah, you don't lose that. That's been fantastic. You'd mentioned earlier, I think it was facilities, process, and people, right? As the three different areas.
Facilities, systems, and people.
Systems and people. So, talking about the people, how do you go about looking for good people? How do you make bets on the people you want to invest in and hire them in? What do you look for?
Well, we're different in many ways, and this one is significantly different. We really, when we look for people, we hire and make 70% of our hiring decision based on personality or character, and not tasks, which is the common way of hiring people. Our belief is that it's far better to have people that can get along with each other than hire the smartest person who maybe has a personality of a rattlesnake and and we strive for a collaborative environment. And everybody says that, but what I mean by collaborative, or what we mean by collaborative, is that when somebody at work gets an idea or has a challenge, we ask them to consult somebody else, particularly outside their discipline, as to how you might solve that challenge, or how you might reach that challenge. And you know what happens? People love it when somebody authentically asks, your opinion. I mean, you do, right? And I do. And oftentimes, the obvious to someone outside the discipline is stark. And the reason is because they don't spend all their time in that particular discipline. We're human beings. We're creatures of habit.
Right.
So understanding that, we do a significant amount of using assessment tools such as Myers-Briggs and DISC and PF, 16 PF and Berkman, core values exercises, and so on. We use those tools
Great.
And we write a job description, um, and candidates take these personality or tests, and we have a behaviorist who kind of looks at these two things, never sees the candidate,
Right.
but
Interesting.
takes the results of the tests, compares it to the job description, and then comes up with assumptions. And so that gives us, our interviews are significantly different. I mean, if I were to say, share with you and others how we're different, I would say we're different in hiring, we're different in onboarding, we're different in personal growth, and we're different in conflict resolution. But we start with the hiring situation, and it's these things are not absolute, and it's as much an art and a science using these tools. But we've been doing it for about 29 years, I'd say. And we have a 92% success rate.
Wow.
And and the thing is, when people come to us from the outside, especially people that come from previously from large organizations, publicly held organizations, we know that they're used to doing things a different way. And so we have to recondition their thinking. And so our onboarding
and the assessments, I'm sure the assessments are helpful to be able to determine whether or not those people can be reconditioned.
Exactly.
I use assessments in my recruiting, and I tell my clients it should be at least a third of your final decision. But, so often you can separate the people, particularly when you're looking to move from a large corporation to a family-owned business, as to whether or not they can make that transition. And people can be very good, but they just can't make it sometimes. Right?
Well, that's exactly right. And we just assume that it's going to be difficult. And so, and it is. It is difficult. I mean, I went through it. The reason we use this kind of system, as we call it, was basically my own personal experience of coming from a fast-paced world in motorsports to this family business, and I had to reinvent myself many times. And throughout that process, which was painful, I mean, very painful, I learned a bunch about what it takes to reinvent yourself, and so that system has been sort of in play here for a really long time. We call our onboarding process a detox. Because it really is. And got
to recondition folks.
I won't bore you and go through it, but it takes about 6 or 7 months for people to realize that they can actually share their ideas without fear of somebody stealing it and taking the credit for it. But what the result is it's the unfair advantage, because we have people that care about each other. We have people that understand that they have their teammates back, and their teammates have their back as well. And that is achieved by building relationships one-on-one. That's the only way you can do it with all of our folks that are based on trust and respect. And when I talk about relationships, it's not, hey, what's going on in the task area. It's getting to know the other person. That's what it takes.
Building that trust and respect with each other.
And people are not comfortable with that because that's private.
Well, they're not used to it, particularly in big corporate businesses. That's a threat to them. Well, Howdy, time has just flown by, but we do have one last question we ask all our CEO guests, and that's what kind of career and life advice you'd give to someone who perhaps has their eyes on a corner office, perhaps is involved in a family business, one, second, third, or fourth generation, and what would you tell them? How would you kind of advise them? Maybe they're mid-career and taking a look at, all the struggles that they might have in that family business, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, actually, I would say the following and suggest the following, that any interest in family business should be talked about early. The earlier on, the better. And if you're the one that's running the business and you have children, or sons or daughters, you don't put an expectation on them that they need to come in the family business. Let them know that, whatever they want to do, you're going to support it. Right. Okay. And that is huge. And the other thing is that, we're not all the same. And if someone wants to do something different, you've got to encourage it. The hard part, I guess, in family businesses is people talking objectively. And that's the most difficult thing. Yeah. And, if you're a president of a company, you have 4 children or 3 children or something, you don't, as a parent, want to anoint one, because then you're going to lose the other 2. Yeah. And the only way you can deal with that is to talk about these things openly and honestly. Right. And that's very difficult to do.
Yeah. Well, good counsel. Howdy Holmes, Chief Executive Officer and President of Chelsea Milling Company, the makers of Jiffy Mix, world renowned. Thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Well, I appreciate it. You're an easy guy to talk to and make me feel comfortable. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.